Welcome to this Hobart and William Smith podcast. I'm Ted Baker, and I'm joined by the outgoing athletic director at Hobart College, Mike Hanna. Almost 50 years since you graduated in 1968. Mike, thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Pleasure, Ted.
Now, I've always called you Coach Hanna because I think once a coach, always a coach. Is that how you still see yourself?
Well, yes, I guess. I see myself as Mike Hanna, but everybody seems to call me Coach. It's fine with me, and it's been, it's been an honor to serve, and I have a high regard for the coaching profession.
So I think the first question everybody has is why now? What made you decide it was time after 37 years to step aside?
Well, I've enjoyed all 37 of them here, and I wanted to go out feeling that way. Our programs are in good shape. Facilities are good, if not great, and we have a terrific coaching staff. So that part of it is in good shape. I have, I'm very confident that President Greg Vincent and Tom Bizzuto, as the board chair, and Tom Poole and others, will be strong stewards of Statesman sports. So on the business side of it, things seem to be lined up. On the personal side of it, I've been thinking about this for a couple years. There were a few things that happened earlier this summer. Our oldest granddaughter turned 10, and when she was born, I was in such a hurry to get to Baltimore, I forgot my suitcase, and that seems like a blur. My Uncle Jim, who was 97 years old, passed away in May, and he lived in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I was born, and that was the last of my parents' siblings, and all of a sudden you realize that generation's gone. One of my dear classmates, Dave Gordon, lacrosse teammate of mine and a wonderful Hobart sports fan, had a massive stroke on May 31st. John Hershey, who I don't know if Ken knows, he's a Hobart alum. I was a head RA in Hale Hall my senior year, and John was a freshman. And we crossed paths again at Princeton where we both worked in the late 70s. So we've been good friends, and John and I share a love of trout fishing. And John retired about a year ago, and I said, so what drove that decision, John? And he said, well, a friend of mine said to me, how many more years can you safely wade a trout stream? So, some of these events just sharpen your focus. And so looking at the Hobart side of things are in really good shape. I love Steve Spurrier's line when he stepped down at South Carolina, and he said, I want to go when I can open the door for myself. So it just seemed like from every angle that the timing was right. And, 47 years of work and 37 at the colleges, after you start to get a little tired of the work. I love the people, I love the place, but anyway, from all angles, it was time.
You mentioned President Vincent coming in. Was that part of it, thinking that gives him an opportunity to name somebody who's, quote, his guy?
Well, he made it a difficult and a comfortable decision. Difficult in the sense, I met with him on March 19th at the admissions building as part of his interview. And I thought, man, I'd love to work for this guy, And it was about a week later, and I told him this, but about a week later that Emily, our granddaughter, turned 10, and it really started to. So, and I do think that it's good for a new president. If I'm thinking about it in a couple of years, why not now? I think sooner's better in this situation, but I would love to work for him. And, I said to our staff when I introduced him in a staff meeting a few weeks ago that if somebody had asked me when I was being interviewed here in 1981, what's one of your dreams? I would have said, if I could go back then, I would have said one of my dreams would be for one of our student athletes to someday be president of the colleges. So here we are. So it's all good.
When you left coaching to get into administration, was it specifically because of this job? Would you have become an administrator, do you think, anywhere else, or would it have had to be Hobart?
Well, for me, it wouldn't have had to have been Hobart. I don't know about other people. Would they have hired me? When I left Princeton, I was 10 years into coaching and just starting to figure out what it was all about. And so it was a really, really hard decision to come here. And it was it's my college. It was my wife's hometown. And you would have think we would have packed up in a hurry, but I still joke that there's fingernail marks in the sidewalks of Lawrenceville, New Jersey, from where my kids and my wife wanted to hold on to this great neighborhood we had. But I had such high regard for Bill Stiles. I think that probably was, and he had died so, way before his work was done. When I was a student here, we all thought Bill was old. Right? When he died, he was 59 years old. That's crazy. So, that, and I know that I wasn't the first choice in that search, but that didn't matter to me. When I was offered the opportunity, I thought, if I'm ever going to get into the administrative side of athletics, which I was beginning to take an interest in, I thought, this is the time. So,
was it anything that you had thought about when you graduated in '68 and went into a career in athletics that, gee, maybe someday I'd like to come back and be the AD or be a coach at Hobart?
Yeah, no, when I graduated, I was going to Penn State to get my MBA degree. And I graduated on Sunday. My mother cried. I came home from playing golf on Monday, and my mother was crying again because my draft notice had arrived. And I was anticipating that, so I enlisted in the Army rather than going in for 2 years. I enlisted for 3 years because I wanted to go to Officers Candidate School. I wanted to get the leadership experience, and so that gave me a little time. And the tipping point was because of golf. I went out. I was stationed at Fort Holabird, Maryland, in military intelligence school just for a very short time. I think 3 months maybe, and I didn't know really anybody in Baltimore. I went out to play golf by myself one day, and I had the photo of the golf course, Mount Pleasant Golf Course, in my office. And some guys were a couple holes ahead of me, and they stopped and waited for me and said, "You want to join us?" I said, "Sure." Turned out to be 2 coaches at Johns Hopkins University who I became friends with. I got a letter from Hal Grosh in Vietnam in the spring of 1971, and Hal said, "Look, I'm leaving Hopkins. You talked about maybe coaching." My plan at that time was to go back to Penn State because they had held my spot in grad school. And he said, "You talked about coaching. I'm chasing my dream." And Hal went on to become a teaching pro, a PGA pro. So I wrote to the athletic director at Hopkins, and long and short of it is I was willing to take the job for next to nothing. My father said, "Are you stupid?" And so that was, so I wasn't thinking that far ahead. That you mentioned the 5-year question. What are you going to be doing in 5 years? You'd have to go back 47 years to when I started at Hopkins, because I do remember thinking to myself, all right, I'm going to give coaching 5 years, and I'm going to see where I am. And I didn't think in my mind I have to be a head coach. I just right after my first year of coaching, Marianne, I got married, so that changed things a little bit. And as far as responsibilities and financial responsibilities. So I said, all right, I'm going to give this 5 years, and I'm going to see, well, in 5 years I was the head coach at Princeton University. So I thought, well, I'm enjoying this, and this is going to be it. So
you mentioned your time in the military. What did that experience and training bring to your outlook as an athletic administrator?
Well, one of the things I learned being a quarterback, and I think I started playing quarterback in Pee Wee football, was to listen to your linemen, ask them what's going to work. And so in the military, my first, after a year or so of training in Officers Candidate School, whatever, my first assignment was at Fort Bragg, and I was the officer in charge of a rifle range, a target detection range. And I was a second lieutenant, a year and a half into the Army. My 2 assistants, Sergeant Norman, Sergeant Lopez, each had been in the Army longer than I had been alive. Right? So we had this little power struggle at the beginning. But I think just initially they thought, here's this young green second lieutenant, he's going to tell us everything to do. Well, that's not how I was wired. So we forged this wonderful relationship. So one of the things that I learned from the military was listen to the people in the field, what's going on out there, because you don't you have to understand what you don't know, and what better way to find out, and then you have to learn what you need to know. And so I always depended on my linemen in football, and the guys that had been in service for a long time. I have a high value for people with experience. So my takeaway from the Army was find out what's really going on out there by listening to people, and forget who's the captain and who's lieutenant and who's the NCO, you know.
I'm going to ask you in a moment what you think your greatest legacy is at Hobart, but I think one of them certainly has to be the coaches that you've hired. Just a tremendous group of coaches over the years. How were you able to attract such high talent to Hobart?
I remember when we interviewed for the basketball job when Izzy Metz was hired, and we had 120 some applicants, and I think this was 05, 06-ish in there, maybe a little earlier than that. But by that time, Mike Craig was several years into his football tenure. We had already hired Mark Taylor and Sean Griffin. And we asked one of the candidates, all the candidates, you know, why are you interested in this job? And President Guerin at the time was pretty fascinated by the fact we'd had so many applicants, I think 120, 150. And this one person says, I want to be part of what's happening here. And so if I could go back to when I started here, I would have found a couple of athletic directors who were well into their careers, who had a great reputation for hiring, and just shadowed them around and spent time with them. But yeah, hiring's like parenting. You know, it's on the job training, and you make mistakes and you hire good people, and you know, so on and so forth. But I think it was just over time you learn more about peeling back the layers and finding out what, you know, coaching is it's teaching, it's inspiration, and it's discipline. It's those three things. And I don't mean inspiration by halftime talks and pregame talks. Inspiration by how you live your life, because you're surrounded by smart kids and they're paying attention. So I think it was just time and experience and getting better at it. And I do have to say, I really studied how to hire people. After a while, I really dwelled on that. And then once we got a little bit of momentum, as that basketball coach said, I want to be part of this, you know. And then we got Izzy, and you know, then we got Mike Neer, dragged him out of the bullpen, and you know, and then Paul Bugenhagen from pulled him away from Bucknell, Greg Raymond and Tim Sweeney gave, you know, I mean, there's a great case right there. Tim Sweeney, you know, making a real gut decision to leave what was a promising career in Division I basketball, had taken a heck of a pay cut because he had that meeting that we all have between our head and our hearts, and decided, you know, I want to be a head coach. I was a Division III student athlete. That's where I want to go. And so, and I, in all those processes, Ted, I was surrounded by a good team of people, you know, on our staff from across the campus. I didn't do any of those on my own, but people said, you know, boy, you got you hired a great head coach, and Greg Raymond. I said, I didn't hire him, I recruited him. You know, and that's what it became for me, is recruiting coaches, not hiring them.
You mentioned the Mike Neer hiring. That was quite a coup. How did that come about? Everybody thought he was done. He announced his retirement, and you were able to get him into Hobart for a few years. Mike
and I first crossed paths at the Naval Academy. We were both assistant coaches, and he in basketball, myself in lacrosse. And at noontime, typically you would go over to the field house and play hoops, so we had a stretch of fall weather like this, and we decided instead of playing hoops, we're going out on the turf and play touch football. So, and I don't know how the word got around. There was no texting or email in those days, but so we all just met on the turf field at Navy, and the way it turned out is it was all the football assistant coaches against the rest of the assistant coaches. So, and I was quarterback, and I had this 6'7" wide receiver, and we kicked their butts, you know. And they always wanted to rematch the football. We never gave it to them. We were smart. We retired them. But that's where Mike and I met. We really became good friends. And, you know, when he came to the U of R, and then I came here. And so he was my first call when Izzy decided to take the Boston College offer, which was a smart move on his part. And it was, if you'll remember, that was mid-August. And, you know, we had a good recruiting class. Trey Blanding was part of that recruiting class. And when Izzy made his announcement, obviously, you know, kids get nervous, but in mid-August, they got really nervous. So,
yeah.
So I reached out to Mike, and I said, and I didn't think he was really enjoying retirement. So I just reached out to him and said, look, if you think about getting back into coaching, I want to talk about it. If you're committed to retirement, I still need to talk to you because you got to help me find a basketball coach. So he came down and we had lunch at the Ramada Inn, and I think in a few days he was on, and on we went. So he gave us 3 great years. I think we won 66 games in 3 years, and he really cemented what Izzy had started, and. We renovated the gym while he was here, and he was the guy who said, "Look, why let green and white and purple and orange get in our way? Let's use them both." And that's when we redid the basketball court. He and Lindsey Sharman decided let's use them both, and I think it's one of the neatest court layouts in college basketball.
So, what do you see as your legacy? What do you want people to say about Hobart Athletics under Mike Hanna?
Well, when I arrived here, I right away, my first Block H dinner, which other people in the department ran because they had experience running it, and I said, look, I'll just watch, see how you do it. I don't need to come in and fix anything. Well, the MVP in football got this trophy that's 2 feet tall, and the MVP in tennis got this little silver cup. So we had a meeting that week to review it. I said, what's with the 2-foot trophy and the little cup? Well, it's a major sport and a minor sport. And I said, well, one, we're erasing those words from our vocabulary, and we're going to look at this a whole lot different. Every kid's going to graduate from here feeling like his sport was a big deal. Easy for me to say that, and Ken DeBolt knows this because he asked me the information. But when I arrived here, we had very few full-time coaches, which you couldn't recruit with part-time guys. I mean, they had day jobs, and so we weren't on the field very good in anything. We were all working hard and wonderful people doing it. So I think part of my legacy, I hope, would be that we raised the level of all the sports. I mean, our hockey team used to pack their gear in 3 or 4 vans and go off and play a game, and now everybody travels in a bus, and we eat at the same meals, stay at the same quality hotels. So that's part of it. The peer leadership seminar, the 4 years here is a blur for these kids. We all know what college, how it felt, right? So adding a layer on to the education they're getting in the classroom, the education they're getting in the athletic arena, by this life skills beyond the game, giving them exposure to various people and ideas and all. I really hope, because I don't have to do that. Nobody said start a life skills seminar. We took some heavy body blows in the late '80s, budget-wise. I would take another tour of South Vietnam before I'd stand in front of a team like baseball and swimming and diving and track and field and tell them your sport's gone, let alone face the alums, some of whom were my roommates in college. So, but we started that because there was a lot of self-pity around here in the mid-'90s in Hobart Athletics because we'd been through this, we'd dropped sports, we'd seen some of our colleagues lose their jobs, and we the lacrosse streak had ended. Thank God Bill Maxwell came to Hobart, because he didn't just turn Hobart football around. He lifted all of us, including myself. And that's when we started the Napier Seminar, not just for the athletes, but for our coaches. And one day I went into a staff meeting and I said to the coaches, I'm sick and tired of losing. And I said, that doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm sick and tired of our kids losing. We got to get better. And that was really the foundation of the Napier Leadership Seminar. And it's not the reason that we're better, but it's a piece of the puzzle.
And I also think what that's done, one of the things that you've done is marry athletics with the service ideal of the colleges. President Guerin really pushed that. You've got, I'm familiar, I know the other teams, the hockey helpers and the things that they've done for Wounded Warrior Project, the football team. You've been able to really imbue that service element into athletics and just bring the athletic mission and the educational mission of the college together.
Thank you. It's been important. When I was a student athlete here, I remember going. I don't know if it was the Boys and Girls Club or not, but the the building on the corner of the southeast corner of South Main Street and Seneca Street. At that time was a recreation facility, Geneva recreation place. And we used to go down there and play basketball with young kids from town through one of our coaches. And we had an assistant football coach, Don Paradise, who lives in Seneca Falls. And he was also the basketball coach at Mount Carmel High School in Auburn. And he used to take us over there and play with his kids. And it wasn't just to play basketball, it was to get to know the kids. So, the idea of community service and reaching out to kids has been around for a long time. It's gone to a whole new level, obviously, here, and it's wonderful. And our kids they've done a great job. And the neat thing is, you don't have to twist their arms. You just ask them the Salvation Army needs manpower to ring the bells. They're there. So that is, the willingness is what really impresses me the most. And, we're a fairly big entity. We have a lot of manpower in Hobart Athletics, so we're the crowd builders. You need a crowd someplace, call the Statesman. We'll be there. But I admire our coaches for the role they played in it, and I'm deeply grateful to our student athletes for how willing they are.
Now, I'm told you're a devotee of the 1 Minute Manager book and series. How do you bring that philosophy to your management of the coaches and of the athletic department?
One of the appealing things about Ken Blanchard's approach is he takes the BS out of leadership and management. All you have to do is look at his books. They're like 40 pages long. It's 17-point font and, easy to read, but it just makes so much sense. He strips teaching down to a very basic process, which helped me a lot. He strips the management part down. And one of his theories is, catching people doing things right. But that's part of his view of feedback, and of giving people timely feedback in a sincere way, a meaningful way. And then, patting them on the back. I've had friends say, it gets back to me, and one of our coaches will say, she said to me with Coach Hanna, I think I got my butt chewed out, but I'm not sure. So it's, I think patting people on the back, saying, I'm giving you this constructive feedback because I know you're better than this, and we need you to be at your best. I don't know where I got it. I always encourage our people to put their name on their work. If you're a football coach and you're in charge of lacrosse event management, we're hosting people. We're hosting young kids. We're hosting the other team. So that's been, and after reading a couple of his books, I just became a disciple of his, and people are in the related field, because one of the things about Ken Blanchard's books is few of them, if any, were written just by him. It was always a group. He and some other consultants or some other colleagues. So it was a team effort. So he was listening to other people and forging that into his thoughts and all. And again, it was, we all have busy jobs, and I'm an avid reader and big believer in professional development, but I don't have a lot of time for that. So Blanchard's book just sort of fit that bill, and he's a funny guy.
How much interaction do you have with your William Smith counterpart, Deb Stewart? Do you get a chance to compare notes and learn from each other?
We both aim to do that more than we do. Our daily workday gets in the way. But I think it's remarkable, this whole coordinate process. I think it's a very good one. It's unique. And, where and when we have to put our heads together, particularly on facility projects, Cousins Field, the tennis courts, McCooey Field, all the ones that have happened since Deb and I have been here. We've worked very closely together. We do some things from time to time with our leadership seminars, with Peak Performance at William Smith and then the peer seminar here. We'll bring our kids together. More often than not, we're separate, but we do that. We overlap. But each of us is just a phone call away, and at NCAA meetings, because we have two athletic directors, but we're one institution. We have one vote. So, there's a lot of collaboration that goes into that about, a piece of legislation. How do the women feel about it? How do the men feel about it? So that's an interesting dynamic, but works very well. And Deb just very rightfully so received a national award that she'll actually receive in October in Dallas, and thrilled for her. And we have wonderful working relationships with the Herons. I walked into my office Saturday morning, had a big vase of flowers, and it was from the William Smith staff. So no chocolates, but I got the flowers.
How much impact on the college has the success of Ali Marpet brought? Not only that he's become a great player at the professional level, but just a great example of the kind of man that Hobart College wants to turn out.
Yeah. Well, if you are going to have someone hit the lottery like he did, and I just mean getting to the highest level of your profession, who better than him? Because he's a true statesman. And he was a young man who was an excellent citizen here. His teammates loved him and admired him. Yeah, good student. And so you can't measure it. But that night when they introduced the offensive line, he said, "The Hobart College." Where can you buy that? I mean, that just went everywhere. And it wasn't only cool, it was funny. And it was just something that made people really feel extra good about it.
Have you seen the YouTube video where he's talking with Jameis Winston about who would win if they played? And Ali says Hobart would win in OT, and Jameis is like, "What are you talking about? You're D3."
I haven't, but it's it's what a remarkable story, and and a real testimony to what Mike's done with the football program. And I mean, if the thing that I will miss most from being here day in and day out is the growth of our people. I first got to know our athletics communications director when he was a little kid, and his mother brought his baseball mitt over and wondered if our equipment guy could fix it because there was a piece of leather loose. And now look at Ken. But seeing the kids grow over their 4 years, and not just their 4 years, but in their life beyond, because we follow them, and seeing these coaches grow. I mean it's easy to say, "Yeah, I'll miss the people," but it's not the people as much as watching them grow.
I've had the opportunity to see some of that traveling with the football and lacrosse teams, and we went to Massachusetts a couple of years ago, and to see these guys come back and see them being successful business people and fathers and husbands, I mean, that has to be the real payoff.
It is. I was reading through some cards last night. One of them was from Jeff Tambroni, class I think of '92, and head men's lacrosse coach at Penn State, and one of our great players. And that's what Jeff was reflecting on was, I mean, he used to badger me with questions. He was a pain. And I used to tell him, he always used to say, sometime I want to be in charge at Bristol Gym. And I would say, Christmas Day, you got the keys, you're in charge. But he was reflecting in this note about, now that he's a head coach, and now that he's a husband, and now that he's a father, what his time here at Hobart as a student athlete and then as an assistant coach in soccer and lacrosse, how that's paid off for him. And so it's I'll miss watching the development, but I'll also know that it's going on. That doesn't happen because I'm here. I'm just being selfish and saying I love watching people develop.
How has athletic administration changed since 1981 to today?
Well, it's changed a lot because it used to be our coaches would coach 2 sports, right? Now they're okay. We had tons of 2-sport athletes. Now we have 1 a year, maybe 2 a year, maybe some none. And it youth sports in America is a train wreck. One of my neighbors, he's 14. He played a hockey game at Niagara University Saturday night. We haven't even started practice at one of the best college programs in the country. So this move to specialization, I think, has really been detrimental. And the pressure on our coaches to recruit and be at so many events, all these showcase events, and so that's changed it a lot. My job has become more complicated. I knew fundraising was going to be involved. It's become much more fundraising now. We have this wonderful foundation, the Statesman Athletic Association, which takes a large amount of my time. It's good. I really like it, but facility development has changed. There wasn't much going on when I was here, and then during the '80s, we decided to build that field house, and then it seems like we've been doing one thing after another. A lot of the facility development we do, not a lot of it, but a good amount of it, the fans never see it because it's a varsity weight room, it's a soccer team room, it's things inside, So it's changed dramatically in just about every avenue of the job.
Any particular game or team that stands out over all that time? Of course, Hobart honors the teams of distinction.
Yeah,
a lot of those have been those lacrosse programs out of the 80s. Is there any particular one or biggest game of your career that you remember?
Well, it's not a Hobart game. It's when I was an assistant coach at Navy, and Richie Moran's teams at Cornell were in their heyday in the mid-'70s. And we had a young attackman from Irondequoit High School by the name of Jeff Long. Became a U.S. national team member, now is a longtime men's lacrosse coach at Ithaca College. They had Eamon McEnady and Mike French. We played at Cornell in the NCAA semifinals on a hot, beautiful May day, and we beat them. And we went on to lose the next week to Maryland in the championship game at Homewood Field. But that one game, and that was 1975, and that team that we had were the Cardiac Kids. We had comeback victory after comeback victory, and in that game we got a lead on Cornell and held it. And we hadn't been in that situation much that year, so that was really exciting. Another one that sticks in my mind here is the game against Nazareth in '92 when the streak ended. And I went in. I rarely go in a locker room after a game. I can't remember the last time I talked to a team after a game. It's not my spot. But I went into that locker room after the game, and I told that team. And Bobby Wynn, who was a great player in that team, was back here as a Napier Leadership Seminar guest coach speaking one time, and he reflected on this about. What I told the team was, you just gave lacrosse fans one of the best games they will ever see. You could not have done anything any better. You win, you lose. And that was when lacrosse had just gone to sudden death. So there were fans that day. Boswell Field was packed. There were fans that day didn't realize the game was over because they hadn't seen an overtime game yet this year. And when the kid on the faceoff, the kid went down and scored that goal for Nazareth, it was over, and people were stunned because they thought they were going to, some of them did. And I had gone up to Nazareth years before that. They asked me to come up in a consultant's role because they're thinking about starting men's lacrosse. And after that game, I told Steve LaSalle, their chief financial officer, I said, I still haven't seen the check for that consulting, and now look what you did. You knock us off. But that was a tough game, but I think those kids will always be proud of who they were in the season they had. There have been so many games, but here's one of the games, and the lacrosse fans have forgotten this. But that year that I mentioned in 1975, that Navy team, we had beaten Maryland during the regular season, and then came back and had to play them for the national championship game at Maryland. This was a Buddy Beardmore teams. Buddy had been my coach my junior year here, and he was in that stretch with Frank Erso and Eddie Mullins and Mike Farrell and those great Maryland teams. And we lost to them. The next day, we had to play Army because it was a traditional Army-Navy game, and Army didn't make the playoffs that year, and they refused to move the game. So we lost the national championship game on Saturday and had to play our arch rival on Sunday. And we were walking off the field at Navy Marine Corps Stadium, and Coach Slaza, the head coach, I looked at him. I think we were ahead 2-1. It was a low-scoring game. And he said, I'm shot. You talk to him at halftime. And it was that kind of a thing. But we won, and we beat a decent Army team. But that was, to me, that'll always be one of the amazing parts of my career, just that we had to play that game the next day. So, but so many memories in football. We went down my sophomore year at Hobart in football to play Union. They had a great quarterback, Tom Hitchcock, who was leading the nation. And our coach, Alva Kelly, had a heart attack in the Hamilton game. And Jim Upper was the interim head coach. So we went into the Union game, and obviously we had to figure out a way to keep the ball away from Hitchcock. So in a scouting report meeting probably on Monday or Tuesday, Coach Upper said, part of our plan is we're not punting. Right? They kick off to us, first series, right? It's 4th and 8. And we're all looking at Coach Upper. John Marcatel from Clyde, New York, runs for 14 yards. John ran for 252 yards that day. We never punted, and we beat him. And that was we didn't beat him, just nip him. We beat him, and that was a great game. But I love Nico. I'm not coming up with his last name, but tight end Mike Craig's first overtime game. We didn't even line up. I don't think we went into huddle. We scored a touchdown. We were down a point. We could have kicked the extra point to go into another overtime period. He went for 2. Nico Karagosian. And Nico was a tight end, ran a little slant pattern. And that to me, when Bill Maxwell told me when Bill was sick, he said, Mike Craig's ready to be a head coach. That was good enough for me. I didn't need that 2-point. But when I saw that, I thought this era of Craig football is going to be fun. And so I'd have so many great memories. It'd be a book. But
one of my greatest regrets as a broadcaster is that I didn't know anything about lacrosse and didn't pay any attention to the sport until I started doing it here in 2005 or 2006. So I missed the glory days. Take us back at what was lacrosse like in the 70s and 80s, and what was the atmosphere around Hobart lacrosse in those days?
There were still a lot of lacrosse players being made once they got to Hobart. The high school lacrosse spurt had not come yet. So there were not enough lacrosse kids to fill out all the college teams. So you would see a lot of football kids and soccer kids from other sports playing. So that was one thing that obviously the stick, the plastic stick came in the mid 70s and it didn't get off to, it was sort of like the Edsel at the beginning. It didn't get off to a great start, wasn't well received, but over time they figured out that technology. The fields, playing on, there was no artificial turf, and that was unique to the game. And coaches were just starting to recruit. Willis Bilderback at the Naval Academy went to Uniondale, Long Island, and got an attackman in the late 60s by the name of Jimmy Lewis. And that started recruiting in lacrosse. And Jimmy Lewis was just a lights-out attackman. And Navy won 9 national championships in 11 years, and Jimmy Lewis was the lead guy in the last 3 or 4 of those. So, then the NCAA playoffs only started in the early 70s. So, that was new. And for a while, we competed in the Division II/3 playoffs. So that was new. And then, that whole thing with Bill Stiles getting sick and dying, there was a lot of President Vincent's a better one to talk to about than I am, because he was living it as a student athlete then. There was a lot of turmoil in Hobart Athletics. And Dave Urich found himself as the head football coach, head lacrosse coach. You can't do that. So eventually, as they got things sorted out, they said to Dave, all right, pick a sport. He picks lacrosse, right? Perfect. I mean, if he had picked football, I don't know that he won 10. He'd been a hell of a football coach too, but that was the start of the streak, and of Dave becoming the head coach. And I was walking across campus with Dave one day, and he had a recruit and his father with him. And the father said, Coach Urich, this is probably in the mid '80s. How do you get all these great players year after year? You're just reloading, and what makes them want to come to Hobart? And Dave said, it's the cookies in the dining hall. And the guy said, what? He said, we have better cookies than any other school. And then after the laughing, Dave said, look, for every kid, it's going to be some small thing. And he said, we just try to find kids that are a good match for Hobart. And then, and Dave, you talk about catching people doing things right. Dave Urich, I don't know anyone more tolerant of errors than Dave Urich. He didn't wink and nod at him, but he didn't crush kids. And the reason Hobart lacrosse won all those national championships is that he built the kids' confidence. He played a lot of kids. He was tolerant of honest mistakes. He didn't suffer any fools. You make a stupid mistake, it's one thing. But when you were a first year and a sophomore, you were going to make mistakes. He was very encouraging, next time. but he was also a very good teacher about it. But, so kids had confidence, and those teams had depth. If you got into your fourth midfield because somebody was injured, your fifth attackman, they had played a lot during the year, and they had confidence. So I think, no doubt Dave was the core of that. And his teaching and the way he built confidence. And it was fun. But, people didn't come. In those days, the highest seeded team hosted the national championship game. Well, Boswell Field was empty for the quarterfinals, and a little bit more for this. They were all waiting for the championship. And I keep thinking, someday we may not have this. But I remember we played at Washington College in 1985. It was the first time we didn't host. Washington College had beat us that year, and so we went to. I loved it because I could watch the game. I didn't have to worry about anything because Washington College had to manage the game. So I was silently. I was always hoping for away games because I could go and enjoy them, and it wasn't as much work for me. But it was fun. It was excitement and great fans, and it was just a remarkable era.
You don't have to give any names if you don't want, but have you suggested a successor?
For my job?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I won't have any part of that. Even if I were asked, I wouldn't. That's the college's job. That's what they're hired to do. I've said to our staff, I'm sure when they get to the point where they have a serious pool of candidates, those people may want to ask me questions. Not about people in a department, but about the system and budgets, or those kinds of things. If I can help them better understand the job they're looking at, I would be willing to do that. But that's would be the extent of my involvement.
You'll still be a part of the colleges during the transition as an advisor to President Vincent. Mm-hmm. How much involvement do you expect to have with your successor in terms of briefing him or giving advice if it's wanted?
Yeah. Well, I was honored when President Vincent asked me if I would consider that, and so I will. We haven't defined that at all, Ted. I don't know what that means, and I'm not sure that President Vincent knows what it means yet. But the first thing I have to do now is I'm working with Rob Flowers on creating an interim leadership team for the spring semester, which will be our own people. We have some very experienced people in the department, so I'm working with Rob on that now, and our aim is to have that ready for the Board of Trustees on October 27th, so they'll know what we're going to do in the interim. We'll definitely, I'm sure that we'll look for some outside support, advisors, and as they move forward to create, as they create the next permanent leadership team. But I'll be wading one of those trout streams.
What advice can you give to your successor in terms of being a successful athletic director and being successful at Hobart, and about what it means to be athletic director here?
There haven't been that many of us. It was all I could do at the Brockport football game. I was talking with Jim Krause, who was Babe Krause's grandson. Jim played here in lacrosse, graduated in the mid-'70s. Has been a very generous donor to us. And I knew I was going to retire. I just couldn't tell him. But as I was talking to Jim, I was thinking, your grandfather meant so much to me. He was my first varsity college lacrosse coach. I only got to play for Babe for 1 year before he died unexpectedly. But my advice would be, get out of your office and walk around this building. That's how you get the opportunity to listen to people. And meet people. The opportunity to influence people, in the best sense of that term, comes after you've built relationships. And you can't do that just at scheduled meetings. So get out of this office, and not just get around Bristol Gym, but pop in Win Sealy. Get over to the admissions office. Meet. So move around. I'm a big believer in managing by walking around. And that would be my first. I won't give them a lot of advice. Whoever they hire is going to know what they're doing. But that would be one piece of advice that I would give them.
The measure of a leader is, did he leave his organization in better shape than he found it? You very clearly have. It's been a tremendous 37 years, and it's been terrific to get to talk to you and hear these stories. Best of luck in retirement, and I hope you land the big one that doesn't get away in one of those trout streams.
Hip Hobart forever. Thanks,
All right.
Ted.
Mike Hanna, the outgoing athletic director at the colleges, has been our guest, and we appreciate the time, and thanks for listening.